Fighting soldiers from the sky, fearless men who jump and die, men who mean just what they say, the brave men of the Green Beret.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. And yes, that was the Ballad of the Green Berets by Sergeant Barry Sadler, which actually stood atop the Billboard charts for over 12 weeks in the mid-1960s, which sort of shows you the optimistic and positive attitude of the country early on in the Vietnam War. All right, so we're going to take you through the Vietnam War here, try to make this a little better than the older video that's on Canvas here, and kind of update some things a little bit here. Okay, so basically in Vietnam you have a simple formula, all right, of the French versus the Viet Minh. All right, this starts in 1946, following World War II and this independence movement we talked about earlier. All right, and the Viet Minh are basically just Vietnamese fighting for their independence. It then becomes the U.S. and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, which is South Vietnam, against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. So from that, you should be able to figure out that the Viet Cong were people in South Vietnam that wanted to unite with North Vietnam and make it a communist country. So the VC and the North Vietnamese were the communists, and the ARVN and the U.S. were obviously trying to keep capitalism and maintain what appeared to be a democracy. Okay, so that's who the different sides are. Okay, so in 1945, all right, we have Ho Chi Minh, who we see pictured here, proclaiming the independence of Vietnam from the French, kind of in the spirit of decolonization after World War II. He quotes the Declaration of Independence. Right? He's inspired by Jefferson. He's inspired by Washington. He was a student at the University of California, Berkeley, after working on a cruise ship for a while. And then Truman decides, after Ho Chi Minh declares independence, that he's going to reverse FDR's policy of national independence and promise the French that the U.S. is going to support them because they are resisting communism, and we want to prevent it from spreading. So this is in the midst of the Cold War. Most students often think Vietnam is totally separate from the Cold War. It is when the Cold War turns hot, essentially. All right. So we have the domino theory. All right, here in from 46 to 54. This is Eisenhower's philosophy, as you can see in the video, that if one nation, here being Viet Cong, would fall to communism, then Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, all these nations in Southeast Asia would also fall to communism. So this is where Truman first and then Eisenhower believe we have to make this stand against communism and support the French in this movement against the Vietnamese. All right, but in the spring of '54, things kind of come to a head when the Viet Minh, remember these are the independent French forces, all right, surround the French garrison at a place called Dien Bien Phu, which is the last holdout here of the French. The U.S. considers using nuclear weapons here because they got to support the French. They're surrounded. They really have nowhere to go, and America has pledged their support. But as you can tell by the context, this is 1954. The Korean War had just ended, and Americans don't want to get involved in another one. So Eisenhower backs off and essentially lets the Viet Minh get its independence from the French. Okay, but America's going to try to keep Vietnam as a capitalist nation still. Okay, so in July of '54, they meet in Geneva, Switzerland, and come up with the Geneva Accords to end the war, and we're going to temporarily create a North and South Vietnam, with elections scheduled a few years later to decide if this independent country is going to become communist and under Ho Chi Minh, or with Ngo Dinh Diem, who is a French supporter, an American ally that wants to keep it more in line with capitalism and resist the socialism that was taking over there in Vietnam. All right. Now, conveniently, these elections never happen. All right. Now you can see Eisenhower here shaking hands with Ngo Dinh Diem. You can see Diem wears a suit, looks very Western, where Ho Chi Minh is more wearing the peasant's clothes and has the peasant's hut and hat and things like that. So the elections are canceled because our government realizes we're going to lose. The communists are going to win. That's what the people support. So we're going to back Diem and tell them to resist this communist expansion. That's backed by the Soviet Union after these elections are canceled. All right, so this is still late 50s. No combat troops, no ground troops have been involved. But one of the things that made Diem so unpopular, yes, this is a picture of a Buddhist monk burning himself. Diem, being a French supporter, was Catholic, and he wanted to crack down on Buddhism in Vietnam. So he would, close down some Buddhist temples. He would not honor some of the Buddhist holidays, and really was kind of repressive in his regime because he felt that that would be more supportive of what the North had wanted. So he's trying to establish kind of a uniquely different area. So if you saw this in the papers, you'd realize there's something going on in Vietnam that's not good. Why are people setting themselves on fire in an attempt to resist what's going on there? All right. So in 1957, the Viet Cong are going to resume their struggle in the South. So they're going to be fighting in South Vietnam against the South Vietnamese in an attempt to link up with North Vietnam and make it one country. So there's a civil war in South Vietnam and a civil war between North and South Vietnam at the same time. Okay, so you can see why the South Vietnamese would need American support there. Okay, so Viet Cong is fighting against capitalism and the democracy there in the South. All right, in 1963, all right, Kennedy gives the go-ahead 3 weeks before his own assassination to assassinate Diem because Diem had been a corrupt leader. He was not really embracing the Vietnamese culture. He was kind of distant, favoring the wealthy and things like that. So Kennedy says, we got to get rid of him. So our CIA orchestrates a coup. He's assassinated. And we don't know any of this. This isn't going to come out until much later with something called the Pentagon Papers. We're going to talk about in class on Thursday with Watergate. So a series of governments followed Diem. One was led by a guy named Premier Key. KY was how it was spelled. And they're just as corrupt, and the Vietnamese can't really win the support of, or they don't really win the support of the Vietnamese in these corrupt regimes. All right? So that brings us to August of '64. This is when we're going to see the Vietnam War begin in earnest. All right? So we're going to stop there. This will be the end of part 1 of the Vietnam Notes. So thanks for listening to Kuhn Academy. We'll see you on the flip side.
Silver wings upon their chests. These are men, America's